Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in for our very first episode. We just want to give some content warnings for you all. We talk about religion, death, colonization, and imperialism.
Hey,
Hey,
welcome to Bonfire.
the podcast.
It's
It's
a
a community room.
It's a very special episode of Bonfire the Podcast.
Special because it's our first.
And we wanted to introduce ourselves, your hosts, some of the managing editors here at Bonfire.
So, we are a community newspaper here at UIC, and we're the only independent student-run publication here. We also created this podcast to kind of highlight the people behind making the content that y'all read, hopefully.
I'm Jumi. I focus on wellness and labor in my writing for Bonfire, but we also about to take over the YouTube world, so be on the lookout for that. Search for us at UIC Bonfire.
And I'm Louise. I write, I edit, I make content for Bonfire, and I am so excited to listen and learn all about spirituality and divinity.
I'm Ruby. I'm also a managing editor for Bonfire. I'm the youngest out of everyone. Fun fact. So I'm baby. I also have 2 cats. They're adorable. They're always there in the episodes.
They are adorable. And today, we're actually in conversation with some very wonderful people. To be transparent, a lot of them, or a couple of them, are some of my best friends in the world. All of them from the art collective Divine, DIVINE, stylized in all capital letters. We talk today about spirit and practices, how our upbringing influenced them and us. I know for me, some practices I partake in are definitely smoking weed, like clearing my spaces, being present. And I'm excited to be speaking more about their practices and Divine.
Yeah, I'm super stoked to have all of you listen to this conversation, especially during this time. We're recording this in the Day of the Dead, and it's post-spooky season, which I argue is spookier than spooky season. Also, Election Day is coming up. That's pretty spooky.
So spooky. Oh my god. I just want to push it out of my mind. And I feel like this talk about spirituality was very grounding, not just for me, but I know for all of us. Fun fact, I got kicked out of, almost got kicked out of my confirmation class because I said something about the Bible that I didn't agree with about women. And my mom defended me. But yeah, we did include that in the podcast. But I'm excited for everyone to listen.
Yeah, so we can jump right in. And today we have special guests with us from Divine.
Hi, my name is Sebastian, but you can call me Bash. I'm one of the co-founders and artists in residence for Divine. I'm a theater artist, writer, performer, director, and a drag queen. I go by they, them pronouns. I'm excited to be here.
Hey y'all, my name is Rye. I use they and she pronouns. I am a Detroiter who is in Chicago. My background is in like fashion and museum stuff, and I'm currently studying at UIC Museum and Exhibition Studies and trying to think about what exhibition spaces look like in an anti-capitalist context. And yeah, I'm one of the co-founders of Divine, and I'm the public engagement manager for Divine. My life looks like watching terrible television and listening to great music.
Hi everyone, my name is Talia. I use they and she pronouns. I am an artist in resident of Divine as well as an editor. My background is in all types of writing. I got my degree in magazine journalism, but right now I am working as a bookseller, a nonprofit bookseller, as a social media coordinator. In my free time, I like to water my plants and scroll on Twitter for a long time.
Bash, Rye, Talia, those are amazing introductions.
Thank you. I was a tour guide.
Me too. Half of our job was giving introductions.
Literally.
I guess the first question for everyone is, what is Divine? Like, how did it come about, and how did you get involved?
So this question is always so funny, and I feel like Sebastian answers it really well. Do you want to, or do you want me to try it?
I can do it. I don't know why I feel like I have the founding pitch always ready to go. Well, Divine started, it was supposed to start as just a collaborative zine between me and Rai, because we've always had talks about growing up in church and just like talking about our experiences and how they shared similarities. So it's like, and we've always wanted to do a collaboration. So we're like, why don't we collaborate on a zine? And then we were starting to have like, there's a lot more, and we would love to have more perspectives on it. So it's like, what if we just self-publish an art book, like the ones that you see on nice coffee tables and all that. And we were like, okay, so we're doing it. And then we founded Divine Art Book and like started our Instagram. We started seeing submissions, and then it was like people were like vibing with it. And then out of nowhere, we were like, what if we just do programming too? So we applied for a grant for Allied Media Conference, and we got it. And we did a drag night for like regarding divinity, and it was like a success. So we're like, so are we just gonna go into programming now too? And then from there it just kept growing. It's like, and then we got a year sponsorship from Squarespace. It's like, well, now we have a website. And then we started doing like discussing divinity, Instagram talks, and all this and all that. And then it just like grew, and now it's like a fully fledged platform / just like space that we hope to continue building and growing. Like, we always joke around, but we're also kind of very serious about wanting our own space down the line, and like operating out of a church. We're claiming that space as like queer and trans people. But yeah, what started off as a zine now just became this huge like collaborative collective of artists who just want to share their relationship with divinity, and just like inviting other people in to like heal from that trauma, and also like reconcile their spirituality with where they came from or what they grew up in.
See, didn't they do that so beautifully? And then with Talia, obviously you can speak for yourself, Talia, but I do want to add, just from our perspective, in terms of Talia being like the first person we brought onto it, is that like, we don't look at this project as something where it's like artists are just someone we collaborate with. Like, this is definitely some like a space that like centers artists and doesn't want to just exploit artists. And we're thinking about artists whose work aligns with our vision for Divine and stuff like that. And Talia is so talented. Like, let me just tell y'all, Talia can do literally anything. And so much of me kind of like confronting my relationship with spirituality in my art happened when I was doing an exhibition management study abroad class in Rome. And Talia was also studying abroad in Rome for creative writing, and we were roommates for that. And so we had a lot of conversations about this and processing it. And so from the beginning, like the first program proposal I wrote with this idea in mind, presenting Talia's multiple approaches to art was always included in that idea. So definitely like being able to bring them onto the team was something that I'm so grateful to do, because I believe that they like discuss this work so beautifully and with such like sincere nuance as well, that I just really do love and appreciate. But Talia,
they literally can do everything. Like, for this short film we just shot, they jumped on as sound designer, and then they somehow became prop and set designer, and it was just like, wow, they do that continually and every single time.
Literally stunning. Like, it's actually wild how beautiful the set was. Oh my gosh. And like the ideas they were having around sound, a mastermind. Like, I'm literally just like, I feel so grateful that Divine has expanded in this way, where we're able to like bring on so many talented people to like explore this stuff together.
Oh, that's so sweet. Yeah, I love Divine, and I love the idea of Divine when it first started popping up on my Instagram, which I think is like the first time I saw it. Like, I don't know if we ever actually like had a conversation about it until I like messaged you and was like, hey, do you need any help? The way that I saw Divine was I was introduced to Divine as the art book, and I saw that y'all were taking submissions, and I was kind of like, oh, this is like such a huge endeavor, and it's really great. And I don't know, I don't know what month it was, but it was kind of like we were knee deep in quarantine, and I wasn't really doing anything, and I wasn't really feeling stimulated. And I was like, so I think I like texted Ryan. I was like, if you need an editor, like let me know, because I can really go in on this, and like I want to help out, and I also want to read the submissions and see, as well as I did submit my own work. And I think being introduced to Divine in that way, and just like thinking about my own spirituality, I was like, oh, this is something that I can really vibe with. This is something that is relevant to me, and I'm really excited to help out. So I was really excited to see all of the discussions with Divine happening on the Instagram page, and then all of the programming. And then eventually Ryan Bash asked me to be an artist in resident, and I was like, yes, like I need a collective to call home to. I would like want to have these conversations, and I also kind of want to be held accountable for like the art that I am and am not producing. So it sort of like worked out. And then like Ryan Bash both mentioned, it's also like pushing me to do things that I've never done before. So I've never worked on a set before. I've never worked on a film before. And we're doing all these different like programming things that I've never participated in. So it's really helped open me up to what I can do and who I am as an artist as well.
Yeah, so from what I've just been hearing, art is healing, and it just heals the soul and the spirit. And this kind of turns into my next question. How has Divine, this spiritual and art collective, have impacted your spirituality journey and made it a turning point for you all?
I think for me, literally the foundation of Divine was the start of my own spiritual journey. Prior to this, I had there was a gap in my spiritual side of me, and it was just like I always felt it but never really followed it, or just like I was so traumatized by like my original religious upbringing that I just didn't feel comfortable exploring spirituality. But then I started sharing space with like energy workers and energy healers and tarot readers, and then one time I got my cards read by a community member that I really admire. And it was funny because we did it in her car in the middle of a rainy day because we were supposed to do it in the park. So then she started reading, and then she pulled a card, and out of nowhere she's like, a matriarch is in the car, is with us right now. And I'm like, my mom is alive, my grandma's alive, my great grandmother, that's the one that the only like no like in my close family that I know that passed away. And she's like, she's not clarifying to me, but it is a matriarch. And do you know anyone in your family that does witchcraft or brujeria or like magic work? And I was shook because it was like, no. And she was like, well, she's here to tell me that there is magic in your bloodline and you should find it. And then I was just like shook, and she was like giving me my reading, and it very much resonated with what I was going through at the time. But I was just so caught up with like the thought of like the idea of my great grandmother in like presence being with us and watching us. And then she's like, before we ended the reading, she's like, oh, and she wants me to tell your mom that she still loves her. And I was like, okay, is there tea? Did something happen before she passed away? So then the next day, I texted my mom and I told her it was a dream. And it was like, oh, I dreamed of my great grandmother. Like for some reason, like she said, like she would say, like she loved you. And she's like, my mom, I forgot what she said, but it was like very affirming of like that my mom needed to hear that. And that affirmed to me. It was like, okay, so now there's like definitely like there is no doubt. There's like what I experienced was real, and it's like I always felt like a good pull to like that because of also like growing up I've had some like run-ins with like spiritual work that I never didn't realize it was like spiritual work or like energies or spirits. So that was the first like the catalyst into me wanting to explore the spiritual aspect of my relationship with divinity. And then from there, it just like I started therapy, which I consider therapy is like a very sacred spiritual act when it's like you're with the right therapist. And I had a therapist who valued like holistic and spiritual healing on top of like psychological and physical healing. And she connected me with more energy workers. And then from there, that led me to finding a guide that I did this retreat with digitally. And that really gave me the tools to like practice and find grounding and centering and like start connecting with my ancestors. And then around that time, that was when COVID started happening, and I lost my job, and I was like, I felt like at a standstill, and I was like learning about tarot. I'm like, this is the Tower card happening in real time for like not just me, but like the entire country and like the world and everything. So then I was like, I need to start doing something, or else I'm gonna get trapped in this card and in this like state of mind. So then me and Rise, that's when we started talking about collaborating on the zine, and then it's like Divine, and then from there it just grew on, and then I lost my job, and it's like, okay, I'm never going back to working retail or customer service ever again, unless I'm my boss. So from there I was like, okay, now it's this year, this entire quarantine is going to be all about the work, and the work with like connecting with my ancestors, with healing, with like really starting my spiritual practice, and then with my art and like drag and Divine. It's like, this is a hard year as it is, but it's like I'm not, and I don't think this is making it harder, but I think this is really grounding me and like centering me and giving me the release I need. Otherwise I feel like I don't know where I'd be at right now. But that's how I approach Divine and like what it's done for me in my spiritual practice. And it's like still a long ways to go. I need to build a lot of discipline, because there are days where like I'm very consistent with my practice, and then there are days where I just don't touch it for like weeks.
Yeah, I think that I'm always very, like, I'm not sure what my like spiritual catalyst was, and I'm not sure, like, I'm still like not as spiritual as I feel like I can be, or I'm still trying to figure out how to be spiritual in what ways that serves me. Like I've been like reading about hoodoo and trying to get into that, but that's kind of neither here nor there. But Bash, when you started talking about the matriarch card and like started to feel connected to one's ancestors, that really triggered something for me. Because I think that's kind of how I also started becoming a more spiritual person, right? Is that like learning and trying to create a connection with your ancestors is a spiritual practice. And it's not easy to do, because it's not something that is talked about. Like if you grow up in the Christian or Catholic church, made me start thinking about spirituality, was thinking about my ancestors and what their traditions might have been. Also just like saying that it's harder as a descendant of like cattle slavery and not being able to like trace my ancestors and know how they worshiped before, you know, Catholicism and Christianity became so ingrained in culture, especially as like an African-American person, especially as a Midwestern African-American person whose ancestors, you know, are coming from the South and are descendants of slavery. Like that's a whole thing that we could talk about. But back to this idea of like connecting to our ancestors, I think it was like earlier in undergrad, like I was hanging out with a lot of people who were like into reading tarot, and like one of my friends, a couple of my friends would do readings for me, and they would be like, oh, like, I don't know, you have like some really powerful ancestors. A friend of mine who is also a poet reads auras, and they were like, I feel like I can see your ancestors in your aura. And I've just been told this like over and over again. Like my aunt is a psychic, and she talks about being a psychic, and she like takes me to psychic conventions all the time, who's also a Christian woman, so like we could talk about that. But she took me to a psychic convention, and I got a reading, and the reading was like, wow, you have like very powerful ancestors. So this has been like repeatedly told to me until I was finally like maybe I should listen and like do something about it. So I finally decided to build my altar or shrine, which I've had for a couple years now. But this year I just started like learning about leaving offerings and doing all these different types of things. And so how that relates to divine is directly tied to what Rai was talking about in like when we went to Rome together. We started talking about doing like programming based stuff with like shared art making and altar building. So we're finally doing an altar building workshop together today, actually, which is really exciting. And I don't know, when I saw, like I said earlier, when I saw what Divine was doing and I wanted to submit to Divine, I looked at my work and I looked at my poetry, and a lot of it is about connecting with my ancestors or retelling stories about my ancestors or just thinking about my family legacies in a different way. And I also think that like thinking about family legacies and traditions is a spiritual act. Like it's an act of divinity to sort of trace like what your family does, where they come from, and how it impacts you.
Yeah, and it's like also like to know your history and your roots is to know yourself.
And that's something I was thinking about too, as you were talking, Talia. For me, like anything about ancestors is inherently spiritual. And I realize that's not the case in every context, but like as a Black American who's like also a Black Midwesterner, descendant of like chattel slavery and the Great Migration, anything regarding ancestors is inherently spiritual. And I loved hearing you say that you're like looking into hoodoo, because I've also been looking into that recently. We've also, like Talia and I have a lot of conversations about like being descendants of the Great Migration and like what that means for our specific Blackness. And that's like such a big part of me. And for me, a lot of my ties have to do with like the trauma that I have around death. My dad passed away when I was like 13 or 14, and it was 2 years after we met. And we only met like through Facebook and never met in person. And we were supposed to meet like a month after he passed away. So for me, like trying to like figure out what my relationship was. And the first time, okay, so I also think that there's a lot of parallels between like in the Black church catching the spirit and ancestors showing up and being present. And this is important context. I grew up in the church. My stepdad's a preacher. My mom works at the church. I grew up in Christian school. So I was like very ingrained in the church, and specifically the Black church. And the first time I caught the spirit was after my dad passed, and when I was praying about how I was like dealing with that. And that's the only time I've ever caught the spirit. And I genuinely believe that was like a moment of ancestry. And like, I have a really complicated relationship with my grandma's passing, which happened when I was like 6. And I feel so connected to her in ways that I struggle to like have the language around, if that makes sense. And I feel like for me, so much of, so at this point, like with my spirituality, I'm in a place where I'm like having like fusions of like Christianity and spiritual practices. And I think a lot of it has to do with, well, I just struggle with like formal Christianity. And for me, like because I studied theology, I objectively know how fucked up the scripture that we have is, and how it's literally just like I know like the literal history of it, which is why I can't fuck with it. And then I'm like, but I'm like culturally Christian. Like so much of this is like culturally a part of like who I am. It's like the Black church is literally, we used to joke about how we live at the church. Like I literally had bedding at the church. Like I literally did my homework at the church. I ordered Jimmy John's regularly delivered to the church. Like I was always at the church. And yeah, so much of my being is like culturally Christian, but also understanding like the way that I navigate my own spiritual practice is very much so rooted in ancestry.
I think you said a lot of good things. I love the idea of being like a cultural Christian, which is something I never really considered. But I feel like a lot of I wouldn't say that I grew up in the church, but I did go to church often. I went to an all-Black Catholic school from early childcare to 8th grade, where we went to mass every Thursday as a school. I sung in the children's choir from second grade to when I graduate, because my dad wouldn't let me quit because I made a commitment, which is ridiculous because I was like 8. And also the choir that I sang in was a traveling children's choir. So we would sing at all of these different churches around Chicago for years. So I was also actively visiting like these other denominations of Christian worship that were like different because I went to a Catholic school. So I was like experiencing all these different types of like Christian practices, but they were always Black churches. So it was like interesting to see how that culture changes. And then I went to an all-girl Catholic school for 2 years on the South Side also. But much more diverse. It's like Irish Catholic people. But I think like growing up Catholic, but never really subscribing to Catholicism, like my relationship with the church is really weird because I never remember being like, Jesus is like everything, like God is everything. Or I never remember like being scared that I was going to hell or like being like needing to repent. Like it's nothing I ever remember subscribing to. And I feel like it's because of like who my parents are and who my dad is, which I can talk about because like my cousins have a very complicated relationship with religion where my cousin is like, I'm not taking my kids to church. Like I never want to feel like that again, which is like something that I don't really relate to. But back to the idea of like being culturally Christian, I think it's very real in that like there are things that I still do that are like Catholic traditions that like if I'm not like necessarily a believer, like why am I doing this? But like little things like doing the sign of the cross when I'm like anxious or something, like is like a movement or a repetition that can calm me down or things like that. Like and I like all of the lore that comes along with it. And I also wanted to comment on what you said about catching the spirit. And I think that can manifest in a lot of different ways. But one way that manifested for me when you talked about it specifically after you were talking about catching the spirit and thinking about your father's death is that this year, actually, the night before the anniversary of my mother's death, I like cried in front of my altar for so long. And like, I did not know why. Like, I didn't know why. I was feeling so terrible. And then the next day, I was like working from home, thank God. And I was like so sad. And I did not know why I was feeling so terrible. And I was like telling Marius, my partner, I was like, I feel so bad today. Like, I don't know what's going on. I just like can't do anything. And then I looked on my sister's Instagram story and she was like, today's the anniversary of my mom's death. And I was like, oh my God, like I completely forgot. And that's like something that I felt in my whole body. Like, that's just like crazy to me. So I think that's the way we can like we were talking about, like you feel spirituality and how you're connecting with your ancestors and how you're moving throughout your day if you open yourself to that. Like I don't think it would have happened like that if I wasn't open to allowing whatever comes up to come up.
I also like that you put into words of like cultural Christian and like that. I never heard that phrase, and I think it connects so well to like the communities we come from. Because I feel like so often we leave behind cultural Christians because in our efforts of decolonization, we leave them behind. But it's like symbols have meaning, rituals have meaning, and these like whether we do them because they're habitual or because we actually believe them are different conversations. But it's like, what good is decolonization if you're not going to defend your community from cultural vultures and capitalism and all of that? And it's like it's really upsetting that we often leave cultural Christians behind, because it's like we need to meet them halfway if we're going to really achieve liberation. Because it's like just because they have attachments to these rituals and cultural significant items doesn't mean they deserve to be left behind in our effort to decolonize. Like decolonization should include ways to synchronize upbringings and cultures and traditions, because it's like for like the Virgin of Guadalupe in my culture, it's like she started off as an indigenous deity and she had to be commodified and appropriated to fit Catholicism in order for indigenous people to survive and keep worshiping that deity. And now it's become this entire movement, but it's like people are like, fuck her because fuck Catholicism. But it's like she is a part of our cultural and ancestral trajectory as a culture, because it's like she came from indigenous roots. She is a commodified indigenous deity. So I really like that you finally put into words something I've been trying to, like, what do I call it? People who are like attached to these symbols and like Christian ritual, but probably just do it out of habit. And I'm really glad that you put it into like cultural Christian or cultural Catholicism. That's a very powerful word that I feel like I'm going to start using a lot.
So similarly to what everyone has been saying, I also grew up very religiously. Although I wasn't Christian, I was taught to be Catholic. Catholicism and Latinx culture, what Sebastian was mentioning, is so intertwined. I'm Mexican, so religion is very connected to that identity. We suffered the consequences of colonization one way or another, right? And it affected our communities in different ways of harm. So this idea of internalizing the church, a product of colonization, is how the patriarchy and these institutions inflict harm onto us. And because they endorse gender norms and these behaviors, the spirituality, I strayed away because it was complicated with my past with the church, since it did inflict so much pain onto me growing up. But listening to y'all and your journeys and opening up to all these possibilities in spirituality, like such as tarot cards, and listening to your ancestors, which is something very new to me, listening and thinking about it makes it feel like very enlightening and also very liberating to like think that my ancestors are listening to me, or that I have any. I appreciate y'all mentioning it, because with my communities, we don't talk about ancestry, since the church is the ritual and the family thing, and we don't think about our ancestors and their practices because we consider it a thing of the past, even though like they were destroyed, they were taken away from us. But yeah, I appreciate you guys just being in the space. Oh my god.
I love that. I love to hear that. I love hearing shifts and transformations and growth.
I feel like that's what Divine has been for me, like personally. Like, it's been a breakthrough. It's been a way for me. It's been a vessel through which my spirituality has like began to breathe, especially in this past year, just having the opportunity to just be at home and sit still and just, even though like I am so busy, like I still have all of this space, or I've had all of this space to just be a person in one place rather than like go to work, to school, back and forth to all of these things. So definitely like when Divine was beginning and just thinking about like all of these prompts, just to be prompted to speak and think about spirituality, just for Divine to have given that opportunity has been incredible.
I totally agree with it, what everyone is saying. I think this conversation itself is so spiritual. Like, this is my spiritual awakening. I really don't have that much of a connection to it, especially because I also grew up in a Catholic church. I grew up with like very religious parents, very religious grandparents, who would go to church every Sunday, and I went to Catholic school. I went to CCD. I did all the sacraments, had a very, I guess, like semi-strong relationship with like Jesus. Like I was kind of like a Jesus kid. Like, I would pray every night and I would beat myself up if I didn't. Like, it was like this very punitive, very strict discipline type of thing where it's like if I didn't pray, I would go to hell, and like that was how my mind worked all the time. But then like when I moved to America, well, for context, I was born in the Philippines. At 9 years old, me and my family came to America, but I think when I moved to America and no longer went to Catholic church, I learned a lot from like public school. that was like so different from like what Catholic school taught me. And like the idea of just like heaven and hell became like made no sense to me. Like I was like, so everyone sins, but not everyone goes to hell. So like where is that line? Like that's when I started to think and like question, and also like my cynicism towards everything. That's why the reason why I don't have much of like a relationship or a connection to spirituality is because I'm like by nature a cynic, you know, like you are pushed down and like you're not supposed to question anything, you're not supposed to do this or that when it comes to religion. And so then you build this like mindset where it's like, oh, like I'm just a nihilist now, you know, like I just don't believe in anything, which is I feel like it's okay, you know, if you don't have that connection. But I think like it sounds to me that it's just very helpful in like learning yourself and like finding and centering yourself. It's not even about a god, you know, it's like about focusing on yourself.
And I like what you said about it's not always about God. Like part of the work I want to do with Divine, and it's part of our mission, is to like find the divinity within ourselves. Like we are divine beings. Our bodies are sacred. We're like we're literally cosmic dust. So like we come from the cosmos. We come from a higher plane. So it's like finding that divinity with yourself through mental health wellness, through therapy, through all these things. And I think if you're doing that for yourself, that is a spiritual act. And I feel like not a lot of people think of it that way, but it's like healing is spiritual. And when you're taking those steps to meditate or like work with crystals or like even to give yourself a bath with intention, that is an act of like spirituality and like resistance against the established conditioning that we were given growing up in our religious.
Yeah, and I just want to go back a little bit to what y'all were saying about like religion leading you away from spirituality. I feel like that's something I'm still wrestling with. At first, it was because of shame. And like when I was mourning the loss of my father, any emotions or like approaches that I had to healing were shamed by my family and my church family for oh, like for example, like a counselor at school gave me instructions to like write a letter to my dad as a part of my healing process, and my mom was like, you better not do that, you know, Leviticus talks about talking to the dead and like stuff like that. So much of it, that like tension started with shame. But now like I left the formal church in January 2017, which feels like ages ago now. Oh my gosh, saying that out loud sounds so long ago. But that's when I stopped engaging with church in a formal sense. And that's also around the time when I started like doing more research around like what spirituality could look like for me. And at first, a lot of it, that's why I've been getting excited learning more about hoodoo recently, because that's not what I was hearing about when I was doing that research, which is fine. But I think like a lot of what I was hearing about had more to do with like orishas and other things that I just didn't connect with. I thought were beautiful, but did not connect with on an individual basis. And I think a lot of it looked like I was trying to recreate church with spirituality. And I think that's where I was hitting a block. And I was like, well, what is everyone else doing? Okay, I need to like connect with that too. Oh, I'm supposed to be feeling what everyone else is feeling, and I wasn't. And I think that's like some of the disconnect that I was having initially, is I was trying to like replicate other people's relationship with spirituality. And I think over the past year, I've been taking time to like put less pressure on myself regarding it, and just try to figure out like what is inherently that for me, and like personalizing it to like my own journey with it. And like I mentioned before about how my ancestors were a big part of it, and we mentioned that we're building we're going to have an we're filming an altar building workshop after this. And as I've been thinking about the things to put on my altar, a lot of it has centered around specific ancestors, because I know that that's like what makes sense for me rather than like ancestors at large.
How do you exactly connect with your ancestors? Because I guess I have trouble starting with that, because I don't know really necessarily where to start. I'm very distant from like my ancestors, right? Like my religion, the religion that I grew up with is my colonizer's religion. It's obviously not, you know, like something that's indigenous to the Philippines. It's like Spanish colonization that brought Catholicism to us. And so like I don't know how to approach with like connecting with ancestors or like even knowing like lineage. I think is hard for me, and I know it's like hard for all of you too, because like um we're just like so distant from that, right? Because of like colonization and capitalism and imperialism and slavery and all these things. It's just hard to like track that. So I guess my question is like, where do you start? Like, how do you approach that?
I feel like there's actually a lot of places you can start. I think one of the places is like if you have a relationship with your family, it's just like asking them about, you know, who are their matriarchs, like who is like the oldest relative that they can remember, or just like it doesn't even have to be like an ancestor who is like many lines down. It can just be like your grandmother or your grandmother's mother or like your aunt or anyone like that. And a close friend of mine also asked me this in terms of like starting to build their own altar to their ancestor. And their like mom's family is from Belize, and they were like, I don't feel connected, like I don't know how to start. But they love Belize, so I told them like you can make an altar to a place if that grounds you, if that's like somewhere you can start. Like if you wanted to make an altar to a place where you have ancestral roots, or to a place that you feel you have a connection to. So you can start your altar as just like the feeling of a place or the memories of a place or the associations of a place. And if there's no place like that for you, you can start with memories of any of your ancestors, like living or not living. And if that's still hard for you, you can make an altar to yourself, because like we're all connected to our ancestors, and that might be the closest way that you could start. And then slowly you'll be able to make these connections and understand how you're connected and how you can build off of that.
For me, I've been doing a lot of like asking questions, like Talia said, but specifically finding all of these images of my grandparents. And of course that's hard. We're in a different country, and like the way that history is passed down is mostly oral. And one of the things that really influenced my perspective on religion was the fact that so much was kept from me. Like not so much of that was not talked about. So much of my family's history was not talked about. So like specifically going to my family and making sure that those questions are asked, like that has definitely been a way for me to like figure out like what connecting to my ancestors looks like, and just reckoning with the fact that there's so much I will not know.
Yeah, and it's like for me, yeah, it's very hard for all of us. And I think for me, that matriarch figure that when I got my tarot reading done was like present. And it's like I asked my mom about her, and it's like trying to get a picture of her for my altar. Like no one had a picture of her. Like for me, she was like shrouded in mystery. And like I just know all my mom knew about her, because my mom was raised by her, but still like not knowing her enough. Like she just suffered a very abusive life from like partners and like growing up. And then she's telling me like about like what she endured, but not what she was like or what she did. And then finally my uncle was like, oh, I found this picture. It's not a very good quality picture. I was like, I'll take it. I'm gonna put it. It's all I have. She's like literally the gateway I had into that ancestor work. And it's like, I think even just finding one person in your ancestry that has that connection to you. Cause like I have both of my maternal and my paternal grandparents that have passed away, but I never like had, like in my workings, I never felt compelled or like felt that connection. But like now that I have a picture of my great grandmother, she's like pulling me in, and I feel like through her, I will be able to like get to know or meet other ancestors within my dreams or my spiritual working. And it's funny because like now that I remember this random memory of when I went to Mexico as a little kid. It was during like the weekend of Day of the Dead. I was playing with her altar, which I knew it, now thinking I shouldn't have done. I was like just breaking off wax and melting it over the candle. And out of nowhere, I just get like a whack in the back of my head, and she slapped me with her broom, and she's like, "You don't do that." I'm like, I was so scared of her ever since. And then like a couple years after that, she passed away, and like never got to know what that was about or how she actually viewed her altar, how important it was to her. But now that I have a picture, it's like filling the gap. And I think another thing is chosen families, we sometimes forget that they get to be ancestors too. Like I have a picture of a friend that from high school that I was really close to that passed away, and I feel a connection to her every time. But also as coming from like queer communities, like the elders and the ancestors that paved the way, I have a picture of Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, and like always invoking their energy and like wanting them to like guide me in what I want to do with my activism when it comes to like being queer. And I also have a relic, a little tiny figurine of Frida and a Keith Haring figurine and Selena on my altar, because it's like those are artists that, although they're not my bloodline, I still kind of see them as ancestors because they paved the way in a sense for the art I want to do and the way I connect with my culture. So think of it that way. Like sometimes you don't have that bloodline to work with, but you can find other ancestors that you're willing to work with and they're willing to work with you. And also like cultural items. Like right now, my altar just has like marigolds spread all over it in the hopes that in the Day of the Dead like lore, it's like they are the marigolds of the bridge that they cross to get to our realm. And it's like hoping that in my dreams they will visit me and like I'll have more like clarification of who I am and who the rest of my other ancestors were. So yeah, and it's like it's a lot of work, but it's like when you hit those moments where it's like I connect to something here, and it's like very freeing and like a sense of like peace, because like okay, now I think I it's like you have that puzzle that you've been missing and you finally put it into the puzzle and it's just like a perfect fit.
So yeah, definitely check out our residency coming up. I want to add that it will be archived, so if people want to come back and see the stuff later, they'll be able to. Check out hotwillsfestival.com. Wills is plural, but with a Z instead of an S. And you can also check out Hot Wills Festival on Instagram for more about that residency.
Yeah, please share where the people can find you all individually and what all of you are up to right now.
Well, I am just finishing the editing for the short film that's going to air at the end of the residency, so be on the lookout for that. Also just digital drag, getting the bookings I can while also still trying to rest, because my full-time job is like a lot right now. But you can follow me on Instagram at Diet Concha, DIETCONCHA. And you can follow my drag Instagram at XOXO_Cindy Nero. That's CINDYNERO. If you want to just like my pics, send me some coins, watch my digital drag gigs. And aside from that, just scheming with Divine about what the future looks like and what else we're going to do for the future.
Yeah, this has been really great. Right now I am working on a lot of things. I'm working on making some websites for my partner's growing collective that we're thinking of starting called Earthseed. There should be a page coming up about it soon, like maybe next month. And I am also trying to like commit myself to working on my novel. It's NaNoWriMo right now, which I never do, but you know, puts me in the mood. My novel is about Black queer witches in the Midwest. It's about ancestral relationships. It's about intergenerational trauma. It's about healing. It's about everything we're low-key talking about right now. So I'm trying to commit myself to writing more of that. And you can follow my writing and visual art journey or any other things that I want to talk about on my Instagram at cherub.jpeg. That's CHERUB.jpeg. Or you can follow me on Twitter where I talk shit and post selfies, and that at is Restin Plants, RESTINPLANTS.
Yeah, so this is Rye. Right now, I am working on so many things, and also I feel like I'm not working on enough at the same time. I am, like I mentioned before, in grad school for museum and exhibition studies, trying to strategize to, kill museums and start exhibition spaces that are by and for the communities and do not perpetuate capitalism and the nonprofit industrial complex. I'm also right now interning at Three Walls with programming and doing a lot of interesting thinking and working around disability justice in the context of programming. I am doing so much with Divine right now, which, by the way, Divine, follow us on Instagram at DIVINEartbook. And hopefully by the time this episode is up, we'll be on Twitter and Facebook as well at DIVINEartbook. But yeah, I am also right now, like outside, I feel like so much of my life is my work. I also mentioned, I think before we started recording, that I'm starting my first big boy job tomorrow. And I feel like I'm just trying to get back into my own art practice as like a form of like caring for myself. And I feel like ever since I've been working again, I've just completely fell off. Like I was literally in a community art class and having such a good time. And then as soon as I started working, I just fell off and stopped going. So I feel like that's what I'm doing, is trying to get back into making for myself. You can follow me on Instagram at Basic Mom Dad, BASICMOMDAD. And then that is also my name on Twitter, Basic Mom Dad. I am on private, but if you don't look sus, I will accept your follow. On Twitter, I just be getting bullied by Bash and talking shit about museums. Oh, and again, DIVINEartbook on Instagram.
So you can support them in those ways independently and also give money, give tithes, and support them monetarily through their Venmo at DIVINEartbook, DIVINE, Artbook, ARTBOOK. And thank you everyone who made this come together, including Divine. Thank you, Kenyetta, for editing.
We also want to thank Andrew Pridmore for the original theme music in the beginning, and Luke Bechtel for assisting in editing and for animating the cover.
We also want to thank everyone here at Bonfire. We have the most supportive team members. Is that what we call them? Co-workers? They're not co-workers. Colleagues.
Collective.
Thank you to everyone who has been listening.
And be sure to follow us at UIC Bonfire at Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, SoundCloud, and check out bonfireuic.com. That is BONFIREUIC.com.
I think we're done, low-key.
Yo, we are.